Welcome, friends. It is Tuesday, June the 30th. It is the final day of the first month of the hurricane season. July kicks off tomorrow, and typically we start to see a little bit more activity as we get into July, and of course beyond that. This, of course, is Hurricane Hub Live. I'm Chief Meteorologist Tim Pandagis. Let's get to it. Out there, our area of interest that we were watching in the Atlantic that at no point in time was particularly high chances of developing. At its peak, it was 20%. Well, that AOI, the area of interest, is gone. Poof, gone. All quiet now in the Atlantic Basin. Now in the Eastern Pacific, a different story. One area we've been watching, Invest 95E, now it's 90% chance of developing. So Douglas, the fourth named storm in the Eastern Pacific, looking more likely over the next couple of days. Now in the Atlantic Basin, our named storm climatology, typically when we see our named storms, or number of named storms. The first around June 20th. We got it this year on June 17th, so a little ahead of schedule. So it's not set in stone, but on or around July the 17th. So a couple more weeks, typically, is when we see our second named storm. And then notice the gaps in between the dates get smaller and smaller, of course, as the season gets a little more active, getting in August, certainly. We have three named storms, typically, in the month of August. All right, out in the Atlantic Basin right now, not much at all going on. We've got a lot of dust. I'll show you the dust forecast model here in just a second. There's a lot of it in the Atlantic Basin. Intertropical convergence zone, almost convection-free there. Not much at all going on there. But here is our frontal boundary that was going to be the trigger for developing that area of interest here. And you can see what's left of it right now. There is still a broad spin. There's definitely an area of low pressure there, but the odds of it developing into a tropical system have now dropped to 0. And notice it is moving away from land too, so it is just no threat to land. So over the next 7 days, tropical formation is not expected. In fact, the CPC, Climate Prediction Center, released their 2 and 3 week outlooks for tropical activity, and ghost town in the Atlantic Basin. Eastern Pacific, though, looking a little more active in the weeks to come. Arthur, so far, is our only name on the board. You remember that? That was about 2 weeks ago now. Moderate grade tropical storm peaked at 45 miles per hour. So that's actually a pretty low grade tropical storm. 39 miles per hour greater is a tropical storm. We got to 45. It was around for 12 hours, literally 12 hours. It was a named storm. Then it moved inland, fell apart. Up next would be Bertha, then Cristobal, then Dolly. All right, here's a look at dust. We had a plume that made its way all the way across the Atlantic, through the Caribbean, through the Gulf, and then is now pulled north in this dusty skies in the middle parts of the country. Dusty, hot, humid conditions in the mid parts of the country. That's the heat wave building that's going to be spreading east across the eastern seaboard. Elsewhere in the Atlantic, I mean, look at the amount of dust here, especially this plume. The high concentration of dust here indicated by the more robust rust color. Even out ahead of it, there's a larger plume of dust over the Bahamas, over the Caribbean. So this is what's going to keep a cap on any development happening in the Atlantic Basin, at least through the middle of the month. What this does, too, is this kind of caps sea surface temperatures from warming. It's absorbing and reflecting some of the sunlight, not letting it get to the surface of the ocean and work to warm it up. So especially this concentration of dust here, certainly going to keep that being the case. In regard to sea surface temperature anomalies, what you're looking at here, anything yellow, red, is sea surface temperatures that are running above the normal for this point in the season. And most of the Atlantic is slightly warmer than normal, especially in the main development region, the western part. We do have some cold anomalies as you get closer to the Cabo Verde. Look at the subtropics, though. Just cooking. Lots of warm water there. And then off to the north, some cold anomalies in the North Atlantic. And look at the far northeastern Gulf here. Very warm signature there in terms of the anomalies currently in place there. Eastern Pacific. Each time I show this, it's just more and more robust. Eastern Pacific season is likely going to be a very active one with the amount of warm waters that are in place. A lot of that is because of our signature here of a growing, will likely be strong El Nino in the equatorial Pacific waters off the coast of South America. So that's going to help to create more wind shear in the Atlantic Basin and limit our storm development, most likely, as we get into the peak of the season. So in July, where do we look for storm development? Which areas are typically the hot spots that we could find development? Well, just like we saw in June, it's going to be the Gulf. It's going to be the far western Caribbean that throws some seeds into the Gulf, and the southwest Atlantic still pretty active north of the Bahamas off the southeast coast of the U.S. But we do start to open up the main development region, the far western fringe of that large area that typically breeds our long-track major hurricanes. That starts to open on up mid to late July. What we have to do is get those dust plumes to start ejecting off the coast of Africa at a higher latitude, opening this up to start not only warming on up, but to moisten up all levels of the atmosphere to promote an adequate environment for tropical development. Of course, if our wind shear starts picking up from that growing El Nino, that could just shut that whole area down as well. Main development region, for those of you that don't know, is just a very broad area from pretty much the far eastern Caribbean all the way to the Cabo Verde Islands to the coast of Africa. And as I mentioned, this is the breeding ground for our major long-track hurricanes that can develop all the way out by the Cabo Verde Islands and track all the way across the Atlantic. We've seen numerous of those. Numerous big-time historic storms have erupted out of the MDR, and it typically starts to wake up in July and is with us active August through September and even potentially into October in some seasons, our most active seasons. So here's the Climate Prediction Center outlook I mentioned. Now, this takes us into the second week of July. And notice there's just nothing happening in the Atlantic Basin. Starts to, again, still look at some moderate chances of development here in the Eastern Pacific as we get to the second week of July. Jumping out to the third week of July, still nothing in the Atlantic Basin. Eastern Pacific still showing an area of moderate development potentially here, again, well to the east of Hawaii in the Eastern Pacific. So we'll see what happens there as we get deeper into July. All right, that's the latest on the Atlantic Basin. We'll get a check on what may potentially be Douglas in the Eastern Pacific coming up after a quick break. Welcome back to Hurricane Hub Live. Here's a look at the Eastern Pacific, much more active in terms of convective activity here in the basin. And there is one area to watch, an area of interest here, a 90% chance, not only in the short term, 48 hours, but within the next 7 days, 90% chance of becoming Douglas. Very broad area of rotation, but if it tightens up, it could certainly become the next named storm. Right now, it's known as Invest 95E, Invest Investigative Area. 95 meaning we've gone through 90, 91, 92, 93, 94. And once we get to 99, we'll go right back to 90. It's just a catalog number and the basin indicator E that it's in the Eastern Pacific. All right, what happens if this develops? Where does it go? Well, here's the spaghetti plots of 95E drifting to the north, and then it could be taking a westward trend, and there's Hawaii right there. So if it does develop, we'll see if it does start to meander closer to Hawaii here over the next I don't know, 7 days or so. So Eastern Pacific storm names, Douglas would be next on the list. We went through Amanda, Boris, and Christina, so we'll watch for Douglas to develop over the next 24 to 48 hours, potentially, in the Eastern Pacific. Coming up after a quick break, we've got a really awesome interview with a hurricane hunter from NOAA. We'll see you right after a quick break. All right, welcome back to Hurricane Hub Live. We've got a very special guest tonight on the show, folks. I want to welcome to the show Lieutenant Commander Chris Wood, who is a hurricane hunter pilot with NOAA. Sir, welcome to the show. I'm happy you could join us tonight.
Happy to be here.
Now, Lieutenant Commander, tell us a little bit about your background and how you became one of the most coveted people in the entirety of meteorology that gets to fly into hurricanes. I mean, we look up to you, and you guys, you're like our hero.
Yeah, well, we're definitely a very small group of folks that get the opportunity to do this. Myself, I'm a commissioned officer with the NOAA Corps, which is just like a lot of the other armed services that you'll find. So I went through a commissioning, went through flight training with them. I flew some of the aircraft, eventually got qualified on the P-3 Hurricane Hunter aircraft, and I've been doing this now for about 5 years.
Now, of the P-3 Orion aircraft, there's the nicknames of Kermit and Miss Piggy. Which one do you fly?
So we fly either whatever aircraft's available that's necessary to do the mission at the time. So right now I'm flying Miss Piggy. But that's just because we're waiting for Kermit to get out of some last-minute maintenance that it needs to have done prior to actually being ready for hurricane season.
And I'm interested in the whole process. So what goes into a mission starting for a hurricane? Like, are you guys sitting at the hangar and an alarm goes off that says you got to go out into the storm? What's the process? Where does the call come from to go and venture out into the storm?
Yeah, so the National Hurricane Center is going to be constantly evaluating what's going on out around the world and looking for threats. And when they identify a threat, they're going to basically put out a tasking for us, and we'll get that generally a couple days ahead of time if conditions are allowing us to have that kind of warning. Sometimes they come out a little bit more rapidly than that, but usually we have a couple days notice that there's something of interest out there that they're kind of tracking, and we start to prepare everything that we need to do, and then we are ready to go at that point in time. So we usually have a couple days head start. The models allow us that for the most part, but we're pretty much ready to go within 24 hours at any point in time.
Now, I know there's the Hurricane Hunters, the NOAA segment of it, and then there's the U.S. Air Force Reserve as well. How does that work, the partnership? When you're both going into the same storm, are you guys alternating missions? Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so our aircrafts are very similar in capability, but not entirely. Our Hurricane Hunter aircraft have a lot more scientific capability than the Air Force does, and so we'll generally end up getting different styles of mission that we need to do. So the Hurricane Center will ask for specific things, and then they'll task either the Air Force or us, depending on what it is they're asking about. We can do a lot of the same things, but some of the unique capabilities that our aircraft have are our tail Doppler radar, which allows us to provide a lot more information into the models versus just a lot more of the in situ data that the Air Force is out there collecting, getting the fixes on the center of the storm and stuff like that.
All right, interesting. I want to take you down memory lane. What was the very first storm that you flew into?
So the very first storm I had the opportunity to fly into was Hurricane Earl back in 2022. And that was definitely a very eye-opening experience for me.
Now, explain it. Like, what was it like the first time going into a storm? What was the most memorable part of it?
So I think the really unique thing, and this is true about not just Earl, but every hurricane, is you don't really know what to expect, right? You have an idea, maybe you've lived through a hurricane, making landfall at, where you live, and you've seen what that looks like. But flying through these storms is very, very like dynamic, and it changes every time we fly through. And we're normally flying through 3 to 5 times every time we go get airborne. You do that for 5 or 6 days. You could go through the same storm 30 plus times. Every one of those passes is going to be different, and a storm could give you a really like easy ride one time, almost like am I in a hurricane kind of an idea, like driving down the interstate, and then the next time you're driving down one of the worst dirt bumpy roads that you've ever experienced, right? You're just getting rocked around, and it's the same storm, maybe just an hour or two apart from each other. So like it's very different every time, and that was probably one of the most crazy things that you kind of like experience the first few times. Is just how different it is every time you go.
Interesting. Now, going down that same road, what's been the most violent storm that you've been into, like in terms of the amount of turbulence you've experienced, or the amount of pressure drop that you've seen from run to run? What was that?
So like those are, again, every storm's a little different, and just because a storm is really strong doesn't mean it's going to be the worst turbulence. So the greatest pressure drop that I saw was actually during Milton, where we got to the sub 900s in the center. But the actual pass that we did was fairly, gentle compared to a lot of other storms. Whereas Helene that same year was not as strong as Milton was at the time, but was a lot more violent going through, where we would get knocked up easily 2,000 to 3,000 feet from where we started.
Wow. Now, when you penetrate an eye wall and you get into the center of the storm and you look around and you got the stadium effect, describe what that looks like. Because we've seen pictures, sure, but you've been there. Explain how that felt.
So like when you get the opportunity to come into the eye and you actually have that stadium effect, it really is quite, especially at nighttime, right? At nighttime, it's really amazing because you've gone from not being able to see anything, because a hurricane is a lot of water and you're in a lot of clouds. So you can't usually see very far out in front of you, if at all. But when you get out into the eye and you have that nice stadium effect and the eye is nice and open and clear, and you look up and it's just like cloud, and then you just see stars or the sun for the very first time, it's really quite amazing. Unfortunately for us flying the aircraft, we usually can only enjoy that for about 15 seconds before we're trying to find the way to go through the other side of the storm and continue to collect the data that we are.
Now, what's the largest eye that you've flown through? Can you think of a storm name that you were just like, wow, this eye is just ginormous?
I can't think of a specific storm that would have like a giant eye, because throughout the life cycle of a storm, the eye will change diameter, right? We can go from a 4-mile eye to a 20-mile eye day to day. So as these storms continue to develop and organize and get stronger and then get weaker again, those eye shapes and sizes are going to change dramatically. So I've flown through 4-mile eyes, I've flown through 20-mile eyes, and sometimes those may have been on the same storm.
Now, talk to me about the whole process of the mission. When do you all start dropping dropsondes? When do you start sending data back to the Hurricane Center? And how long are these missions typically? I know they can probably vary, but I guess what's like the longest mission you've gone on?
So when we're flying hurricane missions, they're usually about 6 to 8 hours of flight time every time we go into one. So that's generally the typical range that we're going into. We've gone up to about 10 hours, but most of that is actually because the storm is well removed from any sort of viable land that we can base out of. Um, but once we're in there, we're going to be dropping at least 7 drop sondes on every pass. We're going to do an initial inbound point. We're going to do a midpoint. We're going to do radius and max winds to kind of get that like strongest wind field that the storm has. We're going to drop a center to try to fix the center, and then we're going to do the same thing on the outbound leg, and that's at a minimum. Sometimes we're going to drop a lot more drop sondes than that. Effectively, the data is being collected from the moment we get on site until we depart, right? So we're continuously running our tail Doppler radar, which is collecting effectively like a CAT scan of the storm while we're in there. And then we're also dropping drop sondes, where it could be dropping some of our uncrewed systems, our drones that are in there, and they're going to be collecting data continuously as well.
And that data that you're collecting, you talk about how critical that is to the forecast models that meteorologists like that me use and others across the country to forecast a storm.
Yeah, so like the benefit of our aircraft, we have satellites, we have ground-based radar and stuff like that, but those don't necessarily get the opportunity to get the in situ, the inside the storm data that an aircraft can get. A satellite can only see as far as it can see, but it will attenuate, not be able to get the data. So we take the aircraft into the storm in order to get the data like live from the middle of the storm as we're going to it, and we are getting that data off to the forecasters and the models and the emergency managers in as close to real time as we possibly can. And that data alone accounts for over about 20% greater accuracy in the forecast and intensity models.
Wow, very interesting. One last question for you. What you've been doing this for 5 years, you said. What's been the most busy you've been? Which season was the busiest for you?
I think probably as far as like just how rapidly we were kind of being pushed to go out and pushed to go out was probably around 2023. Um, if I'm remembering correctly, that was the year that we hit a period where we basically spent about 6 straight weeks flying storms. We would come back, we'd have a day or
Jeez.
two off, and then be into the next storm. So that doesn't always happen. Sometimes, though, during these seasons, you end up getting effectively a daisy chain of storms where they just start coming in and they just continuously come in and come in and come in. And we're really busy for that short period of time. But then there's other seasons where we don't, that may not start until September. So we have, several months where we're doing nothing. Or you could have a season like this one, which while we're forecasting below average number of storms, we've already flown a tropical storm 2 weeks ago.
Right. Yeah, it can turn busy on the drop of a dime, pretty much. All right,
Yeah.
Lieutenant Commander Chris Wood, I really appreciate your time. I'm hoping it's going to be a quieter season for you and you get some time to rest before they send you out into some more storms. Appreciate you being here. We'll be right back after a quick break. Well, we've made it through the first month of hurricane season, and so far it's been a relatively quiet start with just one named storm. But around this time in 2024, all eyes were on Hurricane Beryl as it made history. Meteorologist Taylor Stephenson has the details.
This week marks 2 years since Hurricane Beryl made history as the earliest Category 5 hurricane ever recorded in the Atlantic Basin. Beryl developed into a tropical depression on June 28, 2024, out in the central Atlantic. Along the way, it shattered multiple records, becoming the only Category 4 hurricane to form in June and the earliest Category 5 hurricane ever observed in the Atlantic Ocean. Within 4 days, Beryl exploded from a tropical depression into a powerful Category 5 hurricane with sustained winds reaching 165 miles per hour. Beryl now holds the record for the strongest Category 5 Atlantic Basin hurricane in July, surpassing 2005's Hurricane Emily. The storm tracked through the Windward Islands, making its first landfall in Grenada, bringing catastrophic winds and storm surge to several islands. Beryl later made landfall in Mexico, moved into the Gulf, and made another landfall along the Texas coast as a Category 1 hurricane, where it produced damaging winds and heavy rain. Unusually warm ocean waters helped fuel Beryl's rapid intensification so early in the hurricane season. Hurricane experts say human-induced climate change is the reason sea surface temperatures are warming up quickly each year. For 13 News Now, I'm meteorologist Taylor Stephenson.
All right, it's time for Tropical Trivia. Yesterday's question was, what year was the very first hurricane warning issued in the U.S.? All the way back in 1873. All right, tonight's question is, in the satellite era, meaning post-1966, which storm maintained Category 5 status for the longest period of time? Was it Dorian, Katrina, Irma, or Beryl? I'll have the answer for you tomorrow night on Hurricane Hub Live. Remember, scan the QR code to download the 13 News Now Hurricane Guide. It has information on supplies you should have on hand, emergency numbers you might need, and a whole lot more. Remember, weeknights, Monday through Friday, we are here 8 p.m. Eastern. We'll see you back here tomorrow night.